So I just need to tell you that I'm a cheap week, and I am apt to start flowing at any moment, and it's involuntary. I apologize for it. I met Jerry when I was a first-year graduate student at Harvard. I met him through Joe Levine, who had just heard about him through Georges Ray. At the time, I was very taken with the idea of naturalistic epistemology, naturalized epistemology, which Quine was promoting in word, if not in deed. The idea of being able to contribute to a serious project of understanding about language or the mind was very thrilling to me. And when I first experienced Jerry, I was just utterly blown away. I had, the semester before when I was an undergraduate at Syracuse, I had discovered the existence of Chomsky, and I was still sort of reeling from that. But now to meet a philosopher who was still treating recognizably philosophical topics, but in this way that was informed by empirical psychology and linguistics, was positively thrilling. And of course, I was utterly captivated by his personality. It was impossible for me to resist. I remember being very puzzled because at Harvard I was learning that we were supposed to stop doing philosophy from the armchair, and there was no distinction between philosophy and science, the analytic aesthetic. And I thought, well, down the road there's this guy, he's doing it. And I somehow just couldn't figure out why my advisors at Harvard were not as excited about him as possible, or as I was. So I think if he wasn't absolutely the ideal of a naturalistic philosopher, he was as close as it's possible to get. I consider that I learned a lot about philosophical methodology from Jerry, about the way he took apart arguments, the way he brought to bear general considerations that wouldn't obviously be pertinent. For example, I remember transcendental arguments. I did a lot of my early work on Donald Davidson, who had a few of those in his work. So these are arguments that start out by saying something exists, languages exist, then you say it's a condition on the possibility of a language that's something else, and then since languages exist, you conclude that it's something else. Jerry said, well, you have to look out for these first premises, right? Languages exist, okay, but if it's a condition on the possibility of a language that fish can speak it, then what you want to conclude is not that fish can speak language, but that languages don't exist. So, your first premise can't be presumed to be innocent. You are going to have to pay the piper at some point, and if it isn't with a controversial existence premise, it's going to be with a controversial condition premise. I strove to follow Jerry methodologically in all things, doctrinally only insofar as the doctrines were forced upon me, I felt, by the weighty arguments in their favor. I have, at various points in my career, been accused of, quote, channeling Jerry Fodor, which I always take as a deep compliment. So one event early on in my career I thought I'd share with you. I was giving a talk at, I think it was the first meeting of the European Society for Philosophy and Psychology, the European counterpart to our SPP. And I was giving one of my papers on Davidson, and I was criticizing Davidson, I thought in a very Fodorian manner. When the lecture was over, and they called for questions, Jerry's hand shot up, and he was called on, and to my surprise and dismay, began criticizing my critique of Davidson. And he was arguing pretty vociferously about this. And I was just sort of taken aback, and I finally just sputtered. I said, Jerry, what are you doing? And then he said, well, where's the fun in defending the defensible? So I like this incident because, because of course it was vintage Jerry, and he just came up with it on the spot. But it also illustrates to me the way I always felt that Jerry supported me. It was especially important to me when I was a young graduate student. I was a nobody when I started my career. And I don't think he supported me out of feminist principle. I don't know why he supported me, but my experience was that